and punctuation role in our own lives. We came loaded with baggage to year 2 of the Ideas Festival because we took a plane from here through San Francisco to Shanghai to begin our several years of reporting there. We arrived back for year 5, loaded with baggage coming back from Beijing, of course having made return trips each summer to share the ideas and to breathe the clean air of Aspen. Now Aspen is for us another marker and milestone. We left here last summer to begin traveling in our little propeller airplane around the country looking for regions, cities, cultures, and other areas with 2 things in common: that they'd endured some kind of blow, technological, economic, environmental, social, and that they'd at least begun the process of recovering in some interesting or informative way. I won't tell you any more about this project right now. Deb and I discussed it with our partner Kai Risdal of Marketplace earlier this week. We write about it constantly on the Atlantic site. You can see a map of the places where we've spent a week or more apiece. If you think back 10 seconds, you can see that map, and there it is again. But I am going to tell you how our experience in this past year fits my own personal Aspen experience and the themes we have heard this past week at Ideas Festival 10. A year ago, I was part of the My Big Idea lineup for the opening ceremony. And I said that my big, now conventional idea was that we should learn from the experience of the first Gilded Age as we confronted our current second Gilded Age. The premise was that nearly every challenge we have in the early 21st century was matched by one in the late 19th or early 20th centuries. And when we think back, but I said, when we think back on those problems and challenges, we also think of the people who responded to build America politically and culturally and economically. These are some of the names I said I thought of: Ida Tarbell and Lincoln Steffens, Tom Watson and Thorsten Veblen, Eugene Debs, Susan B. Anthony, and W.E.B. Du Bois, William Jennings Bryant, Clarence Darrow, Upton Sinclair, Jane Addams, John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt, Clarence Darrow, Lewis Brandeis. I could go on and on. There are many more names I could give, but the point I stress is that these are names. Names of people, and with them, crucially, the names of concepts and movements. Progressivism, populism, women's suffrage, conservation and preservation, the labor movement, and many more. We say the names of those movements, and suddenly the influence of each person has leverage and lasting effect. This brings me back to last year's Aspen and this year's and what we have seen in between. Across the country, we have found civic groups, local governments, companies, libraries, universities, entrepreneurs, small craftsmen, retirees, all doing surprisingly similar things for the success of their home areas. These range from rebuilding downtowns to constituting libraries as civic centers to broadening and reinventing the concept of career technical education to fostering new enterprises starting with craft beer. They're all doing similar things around the country, but often they're doing so in isolation. One exception illustrates the rule. Each new craft brewery around the country recognizes that it's part of a craft brewery movement in America. And something is true with downtown revitalization as well. But in general, the feeling of collaboration, optimism, social fabric, practicality, distance from the paralyzing issues of national politics, for these things, many people we've seen don't have a common name. They don't recognize that what's happening in Burlington, Vermont is also what's happening in the Golden Triangle of Mississippi or in the Central Valley of California. We know the names, gridlock at the national level and bowling alone about the local level, but from what we've seen in the past year and heard in the past week, we think it's important to begin finding names for a texture of America that is much more promising than the names and phrases we hear more familiarly. Names we don't know yet and will work to shape and determine together so that perhaps one day our children will know them as we now know the names populism and progressivism and suffrage. Developing those names is my idea to go from Aspen 2014. Now involving names, I am delighted to turn the stage to my wife, Deb, my partner in marriage, parenthood, and now grandparenthood, since we got married at age 21, a linguistics PhD who has turned her attention to the distinctive language of each place we visited, and now to the Ideas Festival. I give you Deb Fallers.
Thank you, Jim. So I'm here to give 2 linguistic reports about you, what you've said during this past week. The first one is a word cloud that I've made for you. And this represents the words that I heard at many of the sessions that I was able to attend this week. These are not reflective of the topics, but rather of the common words that I heard you say that were not necessarily about the topics. The more I heard them, the bigger the font grew. And they are some reflection of the soul and the spirit of what made the Aspen Institute, the Aspen Ideas Festival, as I heard it this year. There are a couple of things I noticed in this word cloud. One is that it's very long on nouns and adjectives, and it's very short on verbs. And what this tells me is that we spend a lot of time talking about things and less time calling for action on what we should do about them. Another thing is the coined terms. These are words that we've said before, but that come now with new meaning and tend to go into cliches. One that I would propose that has had a lot of effect, maybe up until right now, but is starting to lose its effect and we should never, ever say again, is disruption. And a couple of others that are still, I think, effective but tend to lose their punch over time might be thought leader and maker. Maker, I'm still a fan of that word. A final one is we need to have a conversation. This is interesting, and I think I heard it at every single session. And what it says to me is that we have these topics that we're opening up and that we're focused on, and that it is imperative to us that we keep talking about them as we're, quote, going forward. OK, next slide, please. The second linguistic report I'm bringing to you is things that you have said. This is not things that presenters have said. I admit to you right now that I have been walking up and down the pathways as you go from session to session, listening to your snippets of conversation and writing them all down. I won't tell you who you are, but you know who you are. One of the most interesting at the beginning of each session is the getting to know you part. When we've been traveling around, Washington and New York still have the "and what do you do?" question as the opener. In Greenville, South Carolina, it's "where do you go to church?" In St. Louis, anybody from St. Louis, you know the question is, where'd you go to high school? Here, I would submit the question is, where are you staying? And it tells a lot about you. You know, I need to say no more. We stayed on campus, and we loved it. Let's see. The sessions. Yeah, this was kind of interesting. What it tells me is that you were eager to embrace a lot of new topics. Didn't matter if you knew anything about them. You got excited, you got depressed, but you paid a lot of attention. OK, next slide, please. Walking and talking on the phone, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. You're running your transitional lives. Life on the campus, OK. A lot of us didn't function too well here. We got lost a lot. We couldn't find the people we came with. We were looking for them. We didn't keep to our schedules. We were really sorry to miss meals, especially the hot dogs. And on our minds, no kidding, I heard this all the time, kitty, 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 as I was walking up and down. So, next slide, please. OK, there are a few things. I was tempted to leave this out, things I wish I hadn't heard, but again, I won't divulge and tell you who you are. A couple of them were me. I have no idea who they were talking about. Maybe me, I don't know. A few of them were very nice. And one thought experiment I have in this, things that you wish you hadn't heard or things that you were happy to hear, do you think those were said by men or do you think those were said by women? And why? I know the answer because I heard them all. And if I'm not going to say, but you can ask me afterwards if you're interested. OK, that's it. And with that, if you didn't get your New York Times today, no, that's it. I'm going to bring the New York Times to you. We have Tom Friedman and David Brooks. And if they're not careful, I'm going to do a word cloud of their columns for next year.
Okay, we are plugged in. So I want to start now with my Aspen question. So Tom, how did you fly in here?
United Airlines.
That's so sad. The deserving have to fly commercial. The undeserving, the bigger the G. Anyway. So we're going to go $5 a verb on this one. And it occurs to me, we were talking beforehand, this is a historic occasion. Tom and I have been working together for a good long while. This is the first time we think we've appeared in public one-on-one. So we've never, and so it's either the Lincoln Douglas debates or Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. I don't know. So though Tom mentioned that we do appear one-on-one all the time in each other's offices. We have offices down the hall from each other. So you're going to hear a version of that. And maybe at the end I'll ask Tom what you predicted 10 years ago. We were both here for Aspen Ideas 1. I predicted a black guy with the middle name Hussein would be elected president. I predicted you write a book called The World is Flat, which would sell no copies. And that we would get roped into doing this at the last moment. So let's start with foreign affairs. I mean, the news today, Israel, weird stuff's going on. The country of Iraq barely exists, Ukraine. What's the big picture here? Is there like a global affairs system anymore? What is the big picture?
Well, thank you, David. It's great to be with you. David and I do share a hallway with Maureen Dowd, and if Maureen would here, she could complete the trio. And David's a great colleague, and I do enjoy moseying into his office, and vice versa. If I think about where I sense things are going right now, I'll take you back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I've always viewed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a microcosm to the larger war of civilization, East meets West. It is, for me, off-Broadway to Broadway. So always study what's going on in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because it very often goes to Broadway. It's the miniature version. So airline hijacking started there, went to Broadway. Suicide bombing started there, went to Broadway. The effort to build the other into and work with the other through reconciliation into a kind of alternative. They called it Oslo, we called it Iraq or Afghanistan. So what I asked myself in my last trip to Israel, David, is what's playing off Broadway? And I wrote about it at the time because what's actually playing off Broadway, I was in Israel in January, and they have a show there that's a kind of cross between Saturday Night Live and Jon Stewart and Colbert. It's called Eretz Nideret, Wonderful Country. And a year ago, it's sort of political satire. The show began with a beautiful Garden of Eden scene, and a butterfly flying across, this beautiful garden, and then suddenly a wall came up. And it was sort of the Israeli self-perception of where they're living. I happened to be there when the show opened this year. And this year, the show began, again, beautiful Garden of Eden scene, butterfly, birds, A wall comes up, and then a dome comes over the top and seals Israel. And I thought that's a very interesting bit of self-analysis of how they see the world. So what's playing off Broadway is a sense, in my view, that the world is actually, the big divide in the world is no longer east-west, socialist, capitalist. I think the big divide in the world now is the world of order versus the world of disorder. And we have got these islands. So if I were to blindfold you and take you to the Middle East and take off the blindfold and ask you where you are, you would say, I'm actually in Nairobi. But I would tell you, you are actually at the Tel Aviv bus station. Because if you go to the Tel Aviv bus station today, what you will see on every corner are large numbers of young African men on cell phones. And what that is about is the most important number in Israel today, which is 52,000. 52,000 is the number of Eritrean, South Sudanese, and African refugees who have walked to Israel for reasons having nothing to do with Zionism, nothing to do with Arab nationalism or Islam. They've walked there because it is an island of order in a growing sea of disorder. I actually interviewed one of them. We had an internet shop and a children's clothing. And he actually told me a story. He was Eritrean. He tried to get into Ethiopia, got thrown out. He eventually found his way to Libya, tried 3 times to sail from Libya to Italy, got turned back all 3 times. I think got arrested once in Italy and thrown back. And he eventually walked to Israel, where he was reunited with his father.
Across the
They walk all the way across, I mean, buses, trains, whatever. But I mean, they basically go there through any means they can, hitchhiking. And that's why the last fence Israel built had nothing to do with the Palestinians. It was a fence from Eilat to Gaza to keep the world of disorder out.
Right. God, it took us, our people 40 years to do that.
That's right, exactly. So if you pick up the Economist this week, you could actually write the history of the world from the Economist, because what you see is, one of the lead stories is about also it's 52 or 53,000 young children now from Central America, Honduras, and these countries coming to America, just because it's a place of stability. Libya, big story, breaking total disorder. I met with a group of Tunisian political activists last week. And basically when I said, what could the United States do for you? What's the biggest thing you need? Their basic answer was fences. We really need fences. Because we got refugees from Libya streaming in here. We got from Chad coming up from the south, from Egypt coming from this direction. And then, of course, you have the biggest island you have these islands of order now, Tunisia, Kurdistan, Israel, Jordan in the Middle East, and now a giant sea of disorder right in the middle. And I think the biggest challenge we have, and nobody has the answer, I certainly don't, is how in a post-imperial, post-colonial, post-iron fist top-down world, we manage this new cleavage in the world between order and disorder.
Yeah. Well, let me challenge you a little on that, because one of the things that interests me is we often come out to the same policy. We often do that, but we often arrive by entirely different avenues. And so I'll crudely oversimplify it. You pay a lot more attention than I do to technology, and I'm more of a cultural determinist. And so I think what goes on in people's heads is super important. And so one of the studies, just a little study that illustrates this, they look at people. They did a study of people looking at the Mona Lisa in Paris, obviously, and our eyes are, it looks like we're seeing is stable, but our eyes are constantly moving back and forth. And so they look at what's called the eye saccades that goes across. And so when Chinese people look at the Mona Lisa, their eyes are going all across the whole canvas. When Americans are looking at it, our eyes are just going to the eyes and the mouth, much more focused. When Chinese people describe a fish tank, they describe the whole context of the fish tank. We just describe the biggest damn fish in the tank. And so different ways of seeing. And so, but I call that to mind because if I were to describe the new fences, it would be along cultural and sectarian lines.
With a moral culture or the?
Well, I mean, both moral and cultural. I just see Iraq splitting Sunni Shia Kurd. I see Palestinian and Israeli splitting. I see splitting in many, many violent parts around the world, including Ukraine, by the way. And just culture getting much more determinative, which to me is in tension with the economic forces, which I totally agree with you about the world is flat.
So let me push back on that a little bit, because I wrote a column last week about arsonists and firefighters. And it had to do with the fact that when I lived in Beirut, and I lived in Beirut in the middle of a civil war, but it was more broadly, had to do, the Palestinians were there, and it was sort of Palestinian Christian, Muslim Christian. But I experienced many Muslims there who were intermarried, Shiites and Sunnis. They call them sushi, you know. And even in Iraq and in Bahrain and in these countries, there is so much more mixing than people realize. You actually have to strike a match to this. You actually have to go out of your. I don't think it is as determined that they live that way. I told a story this morning at the Ukraine session. It really had with Salam Fayyad, that had a big. I gave the commencement address at the American University of Kurdistan, Suleimania, and after the commencement, they had a dinner, and I was seated next to the governor of Kirkuk, which at that point was outside of Kurdistan. This is a week before everything. And I had been in Kirkuk in 2009 with Admiral Mullen. I had gone on a trip there. And all I remember is going there in an MRAP, 6-inch steel. It was the most dangerous trip I'd ever been on, maybe. And I said to the governor, what's new in Kirkuk? He said, well, we just had an election, by all standards free and fair. I, a Kurd, just got reelected. And here was the city council before I took over, sorry, before the election. It was 6 Kurds, 4 Arabs, 2 Turkmen. After the election, 8 Kurds, 2 Arabs, 2 Turkmen. He got reelected on Arab votes. For an Arab to get reelected as governor, a Kurd to get reelected on Arab votes, that's a big, and why was that? Because you could see it in Kirkuk. You go in there, new roads, bypasses, new schools, electricity had gone from 4 hours a day to 24 hours a day. So I really, my takeaway is that had Maliki governed Iraq the way this guy governed Kirkuk, we wouldn't be here today. So I think, I'll push back a little. I think that governance really does matter. So play it out, because you're writing a lot about changes in our moral culture today. Play that out in this context and in that one.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think how to play it out in that one. I mean,
it doesn't apply there. Play it out in here then.
Well, I mean, I do think culture matters most. I mean, there's a great phrase by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the central conservative truth is that culture matters most. The central liberal truth is that government can change culture.
Yeah.
And so I think both those things are true.
Yeah.
And so I guess, I see a big cultural shift in this country, and I want to get back to the Middle East in a second, but just
please.
I see a big cultural shift in this country from what you might call the big me to the little me.
Me?
The big me.
Yeah.
And that most of us grew up in a culture, boomers and below, where we were encouraged to think quite highly of ourselves. And I have a raft of statistics to prove this, that, in 1950, the Gallup organization asked high school seniors, are you a very important person? And at that point, 12% said, yes, I'm a very important person. They asked the same question in 2005, and 80% said, yes, I'm a very important person. And so we've been raised to think you are special, you are special, you are special.
Interesting.
Time magazine asked Americans, are you in the top 1% of earners? 19% of Americans are in the top 1%. And so along with that has gone a lot of self-esteem. And along with that has gone some narcissism, and there's evidence of that. But along with that has also gone a way of seeing the world which is very achievement-oriented and utilitarian. So we used to have in this country, and in all countries, cultures that were commercial, I'm going to make a success of myself, and some countercultures that was against success. And so we used to have a religious counterculture, religious revivals. We used to have hippie movements. We used to have bohemian, artistic, intellectual movements. And all those things questioned achievement and success. In my mind, we now have none of those movements, except the military. The military is the only institution that's not achievement and success oriented. So we are living in the most meritocratic, achievement, self-oriented culture in our country in a long, long time. And in my view, society hasn't changed, and human nature hasn't changed. And as we grow out of the recession, which naturally causes people to think in economic terms, there's going to be a lot of hunger for spiritual fulfillment. And I gave a talk at the first couple of days of the session dividing between the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues.
What are those?
The resume virtues are the things you build to the workforce. That your job, we can write, we can think, some people can do math, some people can do spreadsheets. The eulogy virtues are things that have to do with your inner self. What kind of person are you? Are you good or bad? What transcendent truths are you connected to? What sort of relationships are you capable of forming? And I think a lot of us have been raised in a society in which we're really encouraged to think about the resume virtues and incredibly inarticulate about the eulogy virtues.
It's interesting. There's a foreign policy analog to that a little bit. I was talking to my friend Warren Bass, who's written a book about Kennedy's policies in the Middle East. And as we were talking, he reminded me of a column I'd written maybe 10 years ago. I was meeting with friends of mine from Beirut, and we're actually discussing a restaurant. And he said, don't you remember, it was around the corner from Rue John F. Kennedy. And I stopped and I said, wow, Samir, there was a time in the Middle East they named streets after American presidents.
Yeah.
How far have we gotten from that? And I think that one of the virtues that you're talking about is the non-resume ones, they're called,
Eulogy.
Eulogy, yeah, is something we're so underplaying, but is so needed in that part of the world. And especially now, you really realize what freaks we are as a country. I mean, we've twice elected a black man whose middle name is Hussein, whose grandfather was a Muslim, who ran against a woman he defeated a woman to run against a Mormon. Who does that? I mean, you know, it's like, I mean, it's like, we are such freaks. And if you ask me from 30,000 feet, what is it that's actually, what we're seeing in the Middle East, is that we're actually seeing pluralistic societies held together vertically by an iron fist, break down, and they have no pluralism. And so the values you're talking, those cultural values you're talking about, is actually what needs to be exported most, not drones, not, you know, that,
right.
And that's really hard to export. David, in reading your column, go ahead, please, yeah.
So the pluralism, where does pluralism come from?
Yeah.
To me, it comes from an awareness that you have only a piece of the truth, and that every culture exists for a reason. It's an attempt to solve a problem, and it has a piece of the truth. All cultures work, and politics is a competition between partial truths. And if you have that belief, then pluralism comes naturally. If you think you have 100%, if you have the truth by the short hairs, pluralism is very hard. Yeah. And one of the things that strikes me, we in this country are polarized because we've lost that a little. In other parts of the country, there's this hunger for certainty. And when you mention John F. Kennedy, there's a pivot in history that has always been of interest to me. So John F. Kennedy, which I think is challenging for us. John F. Kennedy gave his first inaugural address, which we all remember, the Ted Sorensen speech, bear any burden, pay any price. It's very utopian. It's we can do anything. We can end hunger. We can spread democracy around the world. It is we can do it all. 3 days before that speech, Dwight Eisenhower gave a speech, a farewell address, which is famous for his questioning of the military-industrial complex. But if you actually read that speech, it's about we can't have it all. Life is about balance. Our ability to change things is limited. And so the word balance recurs in that speech probably 20 or 30 times. It's a little this, a little that. And so we have a very utopian Kennedy speech, a very moderate and modest Eisenhower speech. And sort of as we think about foreign affairs and maybe domestic policy too, we're trying to gauge how utopian, how aggressive, how assertive we could be. And I say we've screwed it up in two directions. George W. Bush was way too utopian aggressive. I think Barack Obama is way too minimalistic. And striking that balance, I don't know if you agree, is still hanging out there for us.
Well, I think the way to strike the balance where I've come down to is actually invest in the islands of success. I mean, you know, one of the things I've been arguing is that it's kind of interesting that the two most successful Arab Spring countries are the two we've had nothing to do with. Tunisia and Kurdistan. We did have a no-fly zone early over Kurdistan, but they basically found their way on their own, and the Tunisians as well. And I think that where I would be critical of Obama is less on the bombing side or the arming of the Syrian, you know, opposition. But we really need to be investing in the islands of success and identifying. You know, there is an American university in Kurdistan, and we didn't build it. And it's, by the way, it's not called Mao U. It's not called Lenin U. It's not called the Beijing Consensus. I mean, they said that's a model. We want that. The Tunisians found their own way because they had civil society. And if there's anything, you know, if there's anything the Arab Spring was about, it was young people living in a world where they could see how everybody else was living and realizing they lived in contexts that did not allow, enable, and empower them to realize their full potential. And if I were to be critical of the administration, the thing I'd be most critical of is we haven't really, yeah, we got AID here and AID, but we haven't gone in a big way to say, these are the islands of success. We can't fix Mosul today. With all the bombs in the world, we can't fix Mosul. They're going to have to want to do it. But where people want to do it, where we can kick on open doors, that's how I would be more energetic, you know.
Okay, this is going to seem like a complete non sequitur, but I want to pick up on your phrase, invest in island of success, because as we go between vast foreign policy to internal policy, invest in the islands of success. So I mentioned the two virtues, the resume and the eulogy. If you're working on your resume, you want to invest in your strengths. You want to, if you're really good at math, work hard in math. You probably don't want to invest in your weekends. But if you're looking at your own internal life, it seems to me the strategy and the logic is entirely opposite. You want to tackle your weaknesses. and you want to focus, what are the sins I commit? What are my characteristic sins? Am I a pleaser? Am I shallow? Am I a coward? And it's tackling those sins that is the key. And one of my heroes is a guy named Samuel Johnson, who's obviously a famous writer. Johnson led a life, as he called it, radically wretched. The kid was born nearly dead. He got smallpox through mother's milk, developed scars, developed a thyroid problem. They took out his jaw. He was a vast, overblown, overshapen, hideously ugly guy who had jerking and spewing out food. You could barely be around the guy at 25. And he was lazy, he dropped out of Oxford. And then through the act of journalism, doing what we do, literally what we do, he wrote about, if all his essays were about his own weaknesses, sloth, laziness, selfishness, self-regard, vanity, envy. He wrote hundreds of essays on envy because he suffered from it so badly. And over the course of a life, he formed himself into a human being of amazing character. So by the end, he was seen, as one of his biographers wrote, the iron had entered his soul. And he had a home where he hosted sort of stray human beings, just people who were not fit for the world. He hosted them, took care of them, and then wrote these great moralistic essays. And it's just, I'm reminded, as you use that phrase, I was reminded of the difference between the way half of our lives we want to do this outward thing, and half of our lives we want the inward success.
If you learn a lot of things and you write a column for 20 years, and some good and some bad, but there's one lesson I learned, and I repeated it over and over, because it really is for me the uber lesson, which is that in the history of the world, no one has ever washed a rented car. And you know, that no one has ever washed a rented car, no one's ever washed a rented country. When kids have ownership of their education, when people have ownership of their future, when teachers have ownership of their classroom, good things happen. And when people don't have ownership, you get from me, which is the other big lesson I've learned, which is that humiliation is the single most powerful human emotion. And I really feel like if I look back on 33 years at the Times, I spent a lot of time covering humiliated people, people struggling for dignity. And that flip side of the two really covers about 90% of being a foreign correspondent.
Now this is a historic moment because Tom and I have never appeared on stage together one-on-one, and I've never told him the following fact. Tom has written, I've seen him write and I've seen him say no one's ever washed a rented car. Yeah. I did it just so I could say that.
There's one in every crowd.
I was in a rental car, I had some time to kill. I said, just one day this will come in handy.
There's one in every crowd.
But I do totally agree. You know, the Greeks had in some ways a superior psychology than we do. We have a very capitalist-driven psychology. And our psychology is based on self-interest, which is obviously important, that people want to get ahead, they want to make money, they want success. But the Greeks had a word thumos, the thymotic urge. What do people really want? They want some respect. Yeah. And if you go to a poor part of the world where people are disrespected, they're going to walk slowly across the street. If you're at a stop sign, just to show you're going to stop for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you go around the world, you know, this is I'm going to head it back to the Middle East. In my view, if this was about land, say the Israeli-Palestinian thing, we'd have solved a long time ago. You can draw a line on the map. In my view, the both sides are just looking for a complete cosmic apology. We were wrong, you were right. Or my narrative is the right one, and yours isn't. And it's really hard to compromise on that. And I haven't been to Iraq, but I assume the Shiites and the Kurds and the Sunni are going through the same thing.
Yeah, you know, the Israelis and Palestinians have perfected, through the way only brothers and sisters can. They know exactly where the other person's raw nerve is. And they know how to zero in on it. And for Palestinians, it's dignity and a sense of being humiliated by the context they've been put in. And for Israelis, it's insecurity. So Palestinians are perfect at making Israelis feel insecure. Israelis are absolute perfection at making Palestinians feel humiliated. And unfortunately, until you get out of that, and that's what Rabin and Arafat, that was what that moment was all about. And that's what I personally have I have a limited bandwidth anymore. In fact, I have zero bandwidth for kind of who shot John. Because, you know, do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference? You want to make a point? All right, let's get in the Supreme Court here. We'll tell you who is worst in this latest episode, you know, of murdering 3 Israeli boys, abducting a Palestinian, murdering him. I mean, you know, everyone is so beyond that. You know, I mean, at some point, it can't just be about, you know, my friend Dov Seidman always tries to draw the distinction between, you know, people who are just involved in shifting and people are involved in elevating. You know, right now it's just a big shift. Can I get more people on my side? You know, Israelis and Palestinians both imagine that Americans watch the TV news and they have a little button here right on the TV. And after every news report, they vote. You know, I'm with the Jews, I'm with the Palestinians. You know, I mean, they're just sure of that. You know, I mean, and you know, if I've achieved anything as a journalist these years, I've gotten all of them to just give up on me because I'm just not interested in that debate. Because I don't want to be shifted to your side or his side. Can you elevate? Can you actually get to a different place? And if you're just involved in shifting and keeping score, we're just going to go another 100 years of doing this. I mean, what's happened today is both new and tragic, and it's, do you know how many times we've seen this? You know what I mean? Someone does something grotesquely barbaric, and everyone says, see him, and everyone says it's over, it's finished. It's never finished unless you assume that these people want to live this way for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And so I hailed my friend Martin Indyk for his efforts, Salam Fayyad, for the people, for what I call the firefighters, not the arsonists.
Now, we've never... let's close by talking a subject, at least you and I don't think I've talked about. Yeah. We're pundits, columnists. My old joke, I used to be more conservative probably than I am now. My joke was that being a conservative on the Times op-ed page was like being chief rabbi at Mecca. Not a lot of company there. But so what is it we're trying to do? Or was it, we're all here swapping ideas, we're all talking to each other, and all we do is talk on op-ed pages, but we're all talking to each other. And I used to think it was to get influence, and I was always waiting for a day when I'd criticize President Obama or President Bush, and they'd call you up and say, you know, Dave, I never thought of it that way. I think I've changed my mind, but I'm waiting for that call, and I've never had that call. So I don't think we have influence in that way. So why do we do this? Or all of us who talk, what are we trying to do?
It's a really good question, David. You know, I guess if I think about, put it in really personal terms, I'm basically always trying to get back to Minnesota. I grew up in Minnesota, in St. Louis Park, this little suburb of Minneapolis, in a 6 square mile area with the Coen brothers, Al Franken, Norm Ornstein, Michael Sandel. We were all in this place at a time. And by the way, there's a common denominator between our politics. We all grew up in Minnesota at a time. We all had the same Hebrew school. We all grew up in Minnesota at a time when politics worked. I graduated high school in 1971, the year the governor of Minnesota was on the cover of Time magazine holding up a walleye, Wendy Anderson, under the headline, Minnesota, the state that works. I grew up, both my congressmen, I had a super liberal district, were liberal Republicans. And the companies in Minnesota at that time, Dayton Hudson, Control Data, 3M, Honeywell, they invented corporate social responsibility. They thought it was their job to help build the Tyrone Guthrie Theater and the Symphony Hall. So what that gave me, and it's gotten me in trouble over the years, it gave me an optimism bias. And it gets me in trouble sometimes. But there's a lot of Rodney King in me. Can't we all just get along? And I think a lot of what I'm writing about is solution-oriented. And it's really governed by having grown up there. Yeah. What about you?
Well, so my parents were teachers, and so I think we're basically teachers. It's adult education. And I'll borrow a phrase of yours, you name it, you own it.
Yeah.
And so when you're not really telling people what to think, you're trying to provide a context in which people can think. And you're trying to spark something. But if you name it, if you can categorize all the random data that's out there, then you're really doing something. And the second thing, and I've learned to become much more narcissistic in this job, in that I'm just going to show people what's on my mind and what's in my heart.
I don't call it narcissism. I call it tuning out the noise. You know.
Okay. Well, I'll call it self-regarded self-exposure. But we're all on journeys, and mine is a journey from shallowness, trying to be a little more deep as a human being, and maybe going to a newspaper is not. That shows how shallow I'm starting off. If I'm getting a level of newspaper, but I'm exposing that as I try to read my way toward being a better person, and just trusting the audience will not ridicule me, and throwing yourself out there
and trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So, okay, we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a few more minutes. David and Tom and Jim and Deb, thank you for being with us for 10 years. I couldn't have had that conversation better myself, actually. Thank you so much. Deb said something that sort of gave me my opening line, because I don't have a whole lot of energy left to make anything up. But she said that she heard the name Kitty, which made me laugh, but it has also given me an opportunity to share with you the real names behind this festival. And one of them has a camera, and he's got it pointed on me, and his name is Dan Baer. And Dan has been taking photographs for us for 10 years. And we thank you, because it's Dan's photographs that adorn your program guide this year and have adorned covers of the Aspen Idea magazine. And he's a spectacular photographer, and we thank you for chronicling this program and so many things at the Aspen Institute. Thank you, Dan. And then we give call-outs every morning at 7 when we meet, and sort of who's done spectacular work, and we thank them. And so the list is very long, and I'm not going to go through it because many of you know who they are. But first of all, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Deborah Murphy and Karen Peterson. They are tireless. They stay up. They help people change gates. They get people here from heaven knows where. They find hotel rooms and hotels that didn't even know they had the rooms. And they just are extraordinary. And they have another event on Monday, and I don't have near the energy or the passion for the kind of work that they do, and thank God they do. Others that I need to acknowledge are people that have worked with us on the content of the festival. Libby Franklin, who came to us from NPR, who built a beautiful set of lectures every single day for us, researching people, presenting them here. Natalie Mayer, who I work with as my right hand, who has basically worked with every single speaker. And we had 500, so we had 500 people over the last 10 days, and that's a little bit of logistical nightmare. And Tricia Johnson, who is Kitty in all of your emails. I'm just going to admit it. I'm changing that name. It's going to be Tricia from right now. And all of you, Jamie and Jim and the communications team, we've been doing this for 10 years. And it's been a spectacular event, but it's because of all of you out there, and I thank you so much. Can I have a blab joy? So I don't know how many of you got the pleasure of being interviewed by my friend Blab, but we have a closing video for you because our little friend Blab is a robot, and he's been interviewing guests all week. So we're going to close with a little video roundup that will embarrass some of you and hearten others, and it's pretty cute.
Do you think humans and robots can be friends? Welcome to the Aspen Ideas Fest. What's your name? Edie.
My name is Jonathan Alter.
My name is Amani Martin.
Elizabeth. Ferris. Barnes.
My name is Jane.
My name is Anne. What's yours?
I'm going to ask you some questions. If there was no money and no law, what would be the first thing you would do?
Call for help.
Invent both of them.
I would think about inventing law and money.
Make money and make law.
Ride my bike.
Ride a bicycle.
Blow up a car.
I think I would throw a party for the whole world.
Josh would move.
I would move very far away.
I'm a little more optimistic.
Be happy.
Who do you love most in the world?
I don't know.
My brother?
My family.
Me.
I love my mom and my dad and my brother.
It was love at first sight. It's silly to say that the first thing you think of is actually loving a dog. She's always there. I think about her all the time.
My mom. If you could take back one mistake, what would it be?
Running CNN.
He has life questions.
Oh gosh, I only get to take back one?
Living in fear.
Oh, certainly some of the men I've loved.
I think I should have invited Ned to my birthday in kindergarten.
Use scissors safely. Tell me something that you've never told a stranger before.
How much I love my wife.
I love cardboard.
Okay, sometimes when I run out of toilet paper and I don't have time to go to the store, I just steal some from a public bathroom.
I have a blue birthmark on my butt.
I basically never wear clothes when I'm in my apartment by myself.
I would love to be able to play the bagpipes or the piano.
My daughter's pregnant.
I'm scared I won't be able to love and to let myself go in a love relationship.
If you could go back and tell yourself something as a child, what would it be?
You're really awesome.
You are loved very, very much.
To go out of my way more often to be nice.
Be yourself.
Do you think humans and robots can be friends?
I like you.
I think we're friends. Absolutely. I think robots and humans. Great future together.
I'm very cynical on it. I'd be very scared.
Do I think humans and robots can be friends? Actually, not. I think there's a fundamental difference between human consciousness and robotic intelligence.
Yes.
We're friends, right? Yeah, I do. I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship between you and I.
How do you turn it off?
I'll turn it off. Thank you.
No, don't worry.